It's my pleasure to call up our president, Tom Kuhn. And Tom is going to provide remarks and serve as the moderator for our EEI leadership panel, consisting of Nick Akins and Pat Vincent Kalan. So, Tom.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege and honor to be back here with you again at our National Accounts meeting. We have a tremendous turnout, more than 700 people at this meeting is thanks to Steve and his great team, and each and every one of you who are on that committee is a tremendous success. I think Albert Einstein had a quote one time. He said, strive not to be a success, but try to be of value. And I guess this meeting is of value because it's grown tremendously over the years and fills up this big ballroom. We've got a situation where I know you all have a reputation for working hard and playing hard. I had I heard about the golf tournament and the trip out to the Cowboy Stadium. Maybe you should have gone up to the New York Giants stadium there and played against the Giants rather than having that empty stadium. They might have had better luck there, but I had the privilege of going to the exhibit last night. That was a tremendous amount of fun, and what you got a chance to see at the exhibit were so many technologies that are helping us to on the utility side and on the customer side to use energy more efficiently and effectively, and I think that's a story of our business. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to read an article that raised an existential question about the world in which we live, and it said, you know, these cell phones was just one of many consumer products that people use, but probably the most popular one, and it indicated that you know, that this is such an amazing instrument, and they're all incidentally powered by electricity. But that here, you know, at your fingertips, you have all the information in the world, bigger than the first IBM mainframe computer by many, many times. And you said, do you know what the most popular uses other than other than calls and text and emails? The most popular uses are taking selfies. To watch cat videos. So the great intellectual power that this machine gives us, but I kind of discounted that article until Sunday morning when I was reading the newspaper, and I know that's probably an anachronistic thing too, speaking about old technology that you print on a piece of paper yesterday's news, you know, put it in a car or a truck, you wrap it up, and you actually throw it at somebody's house. But it's old technology, and my kids come in and say, you're so last century. But my young 10-year-old came in to me, and he said, Dad, take a break from your newspaper and let's watch some cat videos. And so 15 minutes of my life evaporated while I watched cats and dogs and babies and all these things that we're tormenting each other. I think that though the world of technology for our industry is changing a whole host of things, and change is the word in our business. I've been in the business for many, many years, and I've seen many changes from legislative changes, comprehensive energy bills, environmental bills, regulations, new technologies, et cetera. But I think we've got more profound change going on than any other time, and we all know that change is really primarily driven by technologies, changing customers or markets, or evolving public policies, and we're certainly experiencing all three of those things. And I think we have we've got a great privilege here to have our leadership here, members of our leadership, to discuss some of those changes and to answer some of the questions that you might have. So welcome, and let me introduce first our chairman, the chairman of EEI, which is, I think, the highest office in the land. that you have been chosen by your public, by your colleagues to lead this great industry. And Nick is chairman also in his side job as chairman, CEO and president of American Electric Power Company. Nick has also most recently been elected to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is a pretty great honor too. And he's had the privilege of playing the drums in front of all his colleagues at the latest CEO meeting. So let's have a hand for Nick Akins.
Thank you. I always say it's my second most favorite board.
And we also have with us another member of our leadership, Pat Vincent-Collawn, who's chairman, president, CEO of PNM Resources. Pat is, again, was unanimously elected by her colleagues to be in the leadership of EEI, and is the first woman to hold that post, and maybe, maybe the first female president, chairman of the industry. Maybe you might even beat Hillary Clinton, although I'm not sure. She might get there first, but
she might.
What's this maybe stuff?
I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen, so you don't have to worry about me being president.
Right. So let's have a hand for Pat as well. Well, late last week, the EPA just issued the Clean Power Rule, Clean Power Plan rule. The two of you were very, very involved over the last maybe 2 years, working with Gina McCarthy, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, her team at EPA, many White House meetings, et cetera. Gina came out to a lot of our CEO meetings. The first draft of it was kind of looking pretty bad. I think we got some changes made, but Nick, why don't you start out and talk about what you think the final product looks like and how it will impact AEP.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Tom. So, the Clean Power Plan, as you know, is probably the most transformational type of regulation that's ever been done at a time where the industry is changing dramatically itself. When we saw the initial proposal, we thought, oh my gosh, how can you ever solve this? It was a multivariable equation that couldn't be solved, and particularly when you talk about some of the changes that were being made in the time frames that were being discussed. So EEI companies focused on some discussions with the EPA and the administration to try to right the ship in many respects, particularly as it relates to the timetable for the implementation, because these are state plans. The states have to have time to develop these plans, and to be as transformational as it was, it is important for the states to go through their processes in a very logical fashion to make that happen. The other was the glide path itself. The glide path was very front-end loaded, which caused considerable issues with not only the implementation of clean energy components to be put in place, but the transformation with retirements and new facilities being placed, and the resulting increases in potential costs for customers going forward. So we had to be very focused on making sure there's a measured approach to ensure that we approached it in a proper fashion, so that we wouldn't get out ahead of technology. Technology advances are occurring. We want to make sure it's done in a very wise fashion, because this industry spends over $100 billion a year in capital. We want to make sure that it's wisely spent capital and the ability to really focus on that transformation in a logical fashion. And then also we focus on the reliability implications, because when you think about retirements of existing capacity, transformation that needs to take place, the time frame for, many of you probably know, the time frame from new transmission, new resources to be put in place, all those types of activities require a substantial amount of planning and coordination among multiple parties within various jurisdictions. And because this plan was so unique in terms of its tentacles in so many parts of our business, and really what the states weren't accustomed to, the environmental agencies talking to the regulatory agencies, the many parties that would be involved in the time frame to get this done, those were the major areas we wanted to make sure there were changes made. We were successful in many regards from that perspective. The timetable was made more moderate. There was a 2-year delay in terms of allowing the states to come up with plans. And then from a reliability standpoint, there's provisions in there in the event that there are reliability implications along the way. And also, importantly, the EPA said to the states, when you develop your plans, make sure that it comports with reliability considerations that need to be in place. So all in all, I'd have to say there's a lot of progress made. I know there's states, and we already know how many have filed litigation that are going to litigate this thing, but we're also encouraging our states to come up with plans, because that enables the states to have some kind of ownership in the process going forward. We think that's particularly important because each state jurisdiction will think differently about what opportunities exist, how to advance the ball from a clean energy standpoint, but at the same time, make sure that costs are manageable going forward, as well as ensuring the reliability is there. So all in all, I'd have to say we made a lot of progress. But certainly we've encouraged our states to come up with plans.
Pat, I remember you coming into one of those EPA meetings and you had some charts of the impact on New Mexico and particularly the problems that might cause from a reliability and cost standpoint.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I want to say that the power of working together was really shown in the changes that Nick talked about in engaging in constructive dialogue, which is what I know our national accounts customers and EEI does together. We were able to get some changes. One of the things that I think really resonated with the EPA was the cost implications of this. New Mexico goes back and forth with Mississippi as being the poorest state in the union, and they were very willing to listen to us in terms of moving the timelines. In New Mexico, we're also dealing with regional haze. And the EPA actually worked with us to craft a plan that would have about half the cost impact on customers. The other thing that they were very good at listening to is reliability. Nobody wants the lights going out in this country or anywhere for that matter. And when we were able to show them that there were some specific reliability issues, they listened. One of the things we found is when you sort of go in right arm waving and say, oh my gosh, the grid is going to fall down, everybody kind of shrugs their shoulders and don't listen. But when you're very fact-based and brought in specific instances, the EPA was willing to listen. I think the other thing that the industry learned during this process and that we were able to work with EPA is you know this because you serve customers. Customers have moved on. Customers believe that we need to cut our greenhouse gases. And so I think working constructively with the EPA helped put our industry in a good place with the public and hopefully with you all and saying we understand we need to transition our fleet towards cleaner energy. We just have to do it in a way that minimizes costs to customers and enhances and makes sure that grid reliability is still there.
Right. Nick, this was incredibly important for you in the heartland where a lot of manufacturing facilities occur too, and I think that we got governors and state legislators and others to weigh in with those messages. The professor just mentioned that he is worried that the Clean Power Plan is going to drive up electricity prices substantially. Do you share that view? He was talking about Louisiana primarily, but...
Yeah. I really believe that if we manage this properly, we can certainly mitigate the increases in costs, because there's no question about it. I mean, when we make this transformation from an industry perspective, we've retired 25% of our coal units in the last few years. They've been done in a fashion that was really around the Mercury rules, but the Clean Power Plan will continue to change the way that we dispatch units. You're going to probably see capacity factors lower for coal units, more natural gas being put in place. It will, and other renewables as well. I think it's important for us to realize, though, it really drives a solution that can be more balanced and from a portfolio perspective. If we really advance the ball from not only renewables, demand side management, energy efficiency, smart grid applications and technologies that are being put in place today from a grid perspective to make sure the system is more efficient, we can mitigate any potential increases on the addition of new resources. And I think it's also important to recognize, because we are at a transformational stage, that the customers themselves will be looking at the resources that need to be put in place with distributed generation, energy storage, and other types of technologies. So it does provide us an opportunity to rethink the way that we've historically run this system. We've run it, it's been a sort of a top-down version of generation, transmission, distribution, one-way communication with the customer, usually through the monthly bills and outages. We've got to really get beyond that to think about a system that's more bi-directional in terms of not only data flow, but in terms of recognition of what's happening on the grid. So I think it is a significant opportunity for us. We just need to make sure we manage it well to mitigate the cost increases. I think there probably could be rate increases, but whether there's overall total consumption increases on the bills themselves is another matter. And I think that's something that we need to focus on in terms of this transition. If it's balanced from a risk standpoint, you know, I know manufacturers in our territory, they're concerned about their energy bills on a regular basis. They budget their energy bills and they really don't like surprises. And we need to make sure that that stays the mantra in terms of ensuring manufacturing remains competitive in this country.
Terrific. Well, you know, I mean, the mantra for our business has always been safe, reliable, affordable, and increasingly clean. I think that a lot of things are changing in our business, but that one still is a pretty much of a staple. We've been doing awfully well on the increasingly clean thing with reducing nitrogen and mercury and sulfur, et cetera, by 90%. Electricity is growing, and we've also reduced carbon emissions by 15% from 2005 levels. The President's target's at 32% by 2030, which is a substantial target, but it's still, I think, one, as you say, if we turn our minds to it, we can do it. Nick, you put together an executive committee retreat, strategic planning retreat, a few weeks ago, and you asked the companies to go around and talk about what their company might be like in 2030.
Yeah.
What are the changes they see? So, Pat, let me ask you to start on that one.
I think one of the things we see out there that our companies are going to be much more customer focused, and I say that in a way that right now, to a certain extent, we have to treat all customers like as a rate class or a customer class, and customers aren't homogeneous. And one of the things that needs to go along in this energy transformation is regulatory changes at the state level so we can be much more responsive to our customers. But I see us being continually more involved in clean energy. I see our customers having more and more on-site generation, whether or not it's commercial customers or residential customers. What I see, and I've been doing this a long time too, what I see really different about what's going on now is the technology breakthroughs are tremendous. I don't know how many of you in this room are old enough to remember when we were all going to be displaced by fuel cells. That wasn't real. This stuff is real. And two, what's very different is customers wanting and caring about where their generation comes from, what source it is. And I think that's new too. So I think we're going to be much more involved with our customers in terms of picking those generation sources that they want. I think that the grid is going to be a much more dynamic grid than it is now. It's going to be bi-directional. I mean, I think one of the things we've maybe done too good of a job on is being so reliable. Everybody's forgotten about the distribution grid because we've done such a good job with it. But I think there's going to be much more energy around the grid and what it can do and the data that comes from that. You all know probably better than anybody how much information helps you managing your businesses. And so we're going to be much more focused on information than we are now. We're going to have lots of data. We won't be the next IBM, but we're really going to have to learn to work with that data and help you, our customers, with that. So I think that that's going to be a big change. And I think our companies are going to look very different in terms of the workforces in our company. We all tend to be pretty heavy engineering and finance focused. In our companies, we're going to need a lot more folks that are savvy about data, savvy about marketing, savvy about customers. So I think those are going to be the big changes that we're going to have.
Nick?
I couldn't agree with Pat more. She hit all the right points on that. You know, when you look at our industry and the executive session we had and the EEI CEO meetings, it's pretty consistent across the board. No one's going to sit around and be dinosaurs and, you know, wait for, you know, ships to pass in the night. That's just not going to happen. There's so much going on in our industry today, and really, when you look at the investments being made across the board, very different than just a few years ago. Mainly central station generation a few years ago. Now it's for my company, it's at least 2/3 wires related, transmission and distribution related. So you're seeing not only the benefits of that in terms of the quality of service to consumers, but I touch base with what Pat said, particularly as it relates to customers. We're making a huge transformation in this industry, and for us to make that transformation, it has to be focused on the customer. And you're seeing different types of relationships develop as a result of that, because if we wait for the regulator to tell us what we can and can't do, then we will be that dinosaur. And I think I encourage not only customers, but with the utilities to focus on the regulators to ensure that they're progressive in their approach as well, because it's not about rate classes anymore. It's about what individual customers are focused on. And for our service territory, which is the 3rd manufacturing, a 3rd commercial, and a 3rd residential over the 11 states, it's definitely important for us to maintain stability in pricing that's competitive, but also ensure that we can address specific needs that customers have.
Nick, you mentioned earlier the grid. And I call the grid the network because regular people don't really relate all that much to grid. But, you know, you're a huge grid company. And we see CapEx in the industry, you know, increasing substantially, and distribution particularly, but in transmission as well. There's a situation out there where people think if they get on distributed generation, they're off the grid. And yet we're investing over $40 billion a year in the grid. 40 billion. Wonder if you might talk about that.
So, you know, we talk about some of the issues relative to just distributed generation resources, the options that are available to customers. You have to think about, I mean, most customers that we have, matter of fact, almost all of our customers, no one disconnects from the grid. Because the grid is a social safety net in many respects. I mean, you saw it with Superstorm Sandy, with Katrina, across the board. That basic infrastructure has to be in place. And in order to run pumps, motors, all those types of things that you do from a manufacturing standpoint, you have to be connected to the grid. And so it's important for us to get not only the technology right to support those kinds of investments, we get the regulatory side right as well. You know, historically, it's been a system where it really wasn't prepared for issues of distributed generation. Certainly we had cogen and all those kinds of activities, but that was something very different. Today, if you have rooftop solar, for example, then a customer puts rooftop solar, that's fine. But if you're staying connected to the grid because of the huge investments in the grid and what you are expecting the grid to do to support your home when the sun's not shining, or when you're running pumps and motors, air conditioners, and so forth, you're depending on the grid, and that grid has costs relative to it. So we've got to work through the regulated side to make sure that there's provisions in place to support the investments in the grid, but also at the same time accommodate a multiple set of resources being attached to the grid. So that's what the industry is working on in earnest in many of our jurisdictions today.
Pat, I think you see that in New Mexico too. At our CEO meeting in June, we invited Elon Musk, and he talked to us about a lot of the emerging technologies. Obviously, rooftop solar, he's got an interest in that company, energy storage, microgrids, and things of that nature. How are you thinking about those things coming along?
I think we're thinking about those things coming on as kind of like an all of the above energy strategy and all of the above grid. And I think one of the things that we are working on doing as an industry better is communicating about the grid. You called it a network. The only person, or the only thing that will listen to me when I talk about the grid is my dog, and that's because he usually thinks there's going to be a treat associated with me if he's there at rapt attention. But we're in the process of educating our customers and our regulators about the grid and what we need to do to support all those things. We have 3 Air Force bases and 4 national labs in New Mexico. There's where you see, I think, a big application for microgrids for security reasons. They want to be able to island themselves off the grid, and right now they're about the only ones that can afford microgrids. They're pretty expensive. We have a lot of renewable energy in New Mexico. We're in the top 5 for solar potential and the top 15 for wind. But we're not a big state, so we're going to export a lot of this. So there's where we can use some storage, and PNM had the nation's first fully connected battery storage to solar so that we could learn how to integrate that into the grid, because we have a grid that takes one directional power flows, and we're getting 2. So we see it working with our customers on highly individualized, customized applications. A microgrid's not for everybody. Storage isn't for everybody. Rooftop solar is not for everybody. We'd like to work, for example, more with our commercial customers about putting utility-owned commercial scale solar at your sites. It's a lot more cost efficient than rooftop solar. So I think what we really need to work on, the technology will come and the technologies will be there, is what Nick talked about, is these regulatory models. And this is a place I think we have a lot we can do with you all to help explain to our regulators that we need to be able to treat people differently, and that we need to be able to have new regulatory policies to be able to take advantage of these great technologies in the most cost-effective way for our customers.
Nick, Pat mentioned rooftop solar versus, utility scale solar, or what I like to say, community scale solar. What are you seeing here in your many states?
Yeah, the electric utility industry is put on 2/3 of the solar in this country over the last year. So we are very focused on putting utility scale solar in place because it's half as expensive as rooftop solar, and you get the same environmental benefit. And we've looked at roofs in our territory, and about 20% of the roofs face the right direction, and you have the right credit quality of customers and those types of things. Well, utility scale solar is vastly different. You can really control it. You can do things that really add on to the capabilities of the system. So we're doing that in many respects. We're also doing individual customer solar activities, including rooftop solar. But nevertheless, it's important for us to ensure that we're adopting those technologies in a very focused way relative to the grid. Pat talked about the implications relative to energy storage activities in combination with solar. You're seeing energy storage move along from a framework as well of becoming adaptable in many parts of the jurisdictions, focused on certain things relative to operations of the grid. Now, my view is that the utility is in the best position to focus on adoptions of these technologies, because if we can allow those technologies to move to the masses instead of the rich, we can make sure that there's a broad approach taken which will lower overall costs, and as we move toward a cleaner energy economy, ultimately it mitigates the ultimate price that consumers pay. So we're very much focused on these new technologies. AEP is invested in an energy storage company, for example. We're also doing solar and rooftop, and you are as well. So the industry is moving along that transformational strategy, and it's certainly important for us to be close to our customers in terms of what those requirements are.
Yeah, I don't think that the general public or anybody really thinks about the fact that the utilities have built over 60% of the solar so far in this country. Everybody thinks solar, they think of their neighbor's rooftop. And you've had both the 2 studies come out recently that reinforce what you said, the MIT study and the Brattle study that talk about utility scale solar being half as expensive and twice the bang for the buck in terms of reducing carbon emissions. And
And
yet-
actually be your cheapest way of
Yeah.
achieving the Clean Power Plan objectives.
Exactly.
Because if you have those kinds of objectives in place, half the cost, same environmental benefit, you should be doing those all over the place to mitigate the impact. Because ultimately, it's the taxpayers that pay the higher ITCs, PTCs, and things like that come through the tax side of things. And that's something we need to fix.
Well, speaking of the taxpayers, all the incentives seem to be going to rooftop solar, from the federal tax credits to the state credits and things of that nature. Is that a sustainable situation, Pat?
No, Tom, I don't think it is. And if you kind of just take a look back and just sort of generally say, what are tax credits for, right? Tax credits are usually a form of social engineering to promote some sort of behavior that you want to see, right? If you want to see behavior, you give it a tax credit. If you want us to not smoke or drink or whatever, you tax us really high. So we have spent, as a nation, a lot of money subsidizing renewables. And the idea there was to jumpstart the technology, which I think is a great goal. But now if you look at where it is, right, I think that the solar has gone up about 1,400% in terms of its installation since 2008. Since 2006, when the ITC started, right, the cost of solar installation has dropped, I think it's about 70%, 73%. So I think that those tax credits did exactly what they were designed to do, is to start to make solar generation costs come down, get some scale in manufacturing, and it's done it. So I think it's probably time to put those to an end. There's a fascinating chart I read that shows the subsidization of all different types of energy. And every energy has some form of subsidization in it, but solar, I believe, is almost 8 times more subsidized on a per megawatt hour basis than the next most subsidized form of energy, which is wind. So when you add that and the net metering on, which I'll let Nick talk about, I think we've done what as a society, what we've needed to do is to start put these forms of generation on a basis where they can compete on cost. And so to Nick's point, I think it's because, as we all know, the tax burden in this country isn't necessarily equitably shared, and unfortunately, it's kind of a regressive system. It's time to change that.
But everybody thinks the sun is wonderful, and we think that's great too. We need it. How do you change that mentality?
Yeah, so I think, we're looking at multiple sets of resources. So we're going to, if we continue with ITCs, PTCs, it's going to skew the marketplace in terms of what is truly adoptable and what truly makes sense from an efficiency standpoint. We can balance out the portfolio, and as Pat said, I mean, you put the ITCs, PTCs, and other credits in place to encourage the investment to make sure these resources are adaptable. Well, we've shown that they are adaptable, and the utilities are actually looking at all these sets of resources, and we want to make sure that it's made on a balanced fashion going forward. So for us, it will be a focus on making sure that the ITCs and PTCs start to get flattened and go away so that we can evaluate these resources across the board. From a net metering standpoint, I know, and it's not like the utility industry is against solar. We're not. Matter of fact, the utilities today are pretty agnostic in terms of what resources need to be adopted for the future. We just need to make sure there's a balanced set of resources so we mitigate risk that can occur in the supply for this country. So we've got to make sure that as we go through that process, we're making those decisions on a forward-looking basis that truly makes sense, just like you do with your own companies. You're focused on moving toward a cleaner energy economy associated with lighting and other activities that are occurring across the board. You're looking at resources as well. And for you to make those kinds of decisions is the same for us to make those kinds of decisions to make sure that we're adopting these resources, maximizing the ability to adopt it, and overall lowering the cost for everyone.
And Tom, I think one of the issues we're grappling with as an industry is the whole issue of subsidization, whether it's around renewables, whether it's the net metering, or whether it's around rate design. Right? We have in most states priced residential electricity below its cost because it was a social good, and so a lot of you folks in the room may be paying more. We just filed a rate case, and the biggest issue wasn't around the absolute amount of the rate increase. It was around a solar fee to try to get rid of some of that subsidization, and about a major change in rate design where actually many commercial and industrial customers would see a decrease, but residential customers would see an increase to remove some of that subsidization. And I think as we move forward with new energy sources, we have to have a discussion with our regulators, and this is a place we can use your help, about ending a lot of that subsidization, because we're sending very distorted pricing signals.
Yeah. That's a key point that Pat just made. I mean, when you look at the subsidization, the level of subsidization and where it's coming from, rooftop solar in many respects is fully subsidized. I mean, the business plan is built around these subsidies that exist, and that has to change. You have to start making decisions based on the resources themselves. You add up ITCs, PTCs, state tax credits, and net metering, you already have your business plan that's built around subsidies, and that just doesn't make sense. So we are certainly focused on ensuring that it's adaptable to everyone, not just the few that take advantage of these types of resources.
Well, Germany, Italy, and Spain went down the same route, and they had a situation where Germany, the prices of electricity have tripled. And again, they've got problems with their industrial customers, a great deal to try and deal with the situation. They're trying to artificially shield them there. But they're all trying to back out of those subsidies, and we know how difficult it is to do that once you have them in place. Let's turn to customers now, because you mentioned customers a lot. How do you see the customer engagement in the future? We talked about the possibility of partnerships, things of that nature.
You know, definitely, the only way this industry is going to be successful is to focus on our customers. And as I said earlier, we can't depend on the regulatory framework to allow us to maintain business. We've got to make sure that we're addressing the needs that you have. You're seeing the same things in terms of technology. You're focused on your budget. You're focused on your competitiveness. We are too. And we need to be partners with our customers so that we fully understand what the needs are and that we're responsive to those needs from a broader sense. And so when you talk about infrastructure needs, we're focused on infrastructure, particularly as it relates to transmission, distribution, some of the data solutions that we've talked about earlier. That's all to improve the quality of service to our customers. And then also individually, if there's preferences associated with what kind of resources are put in place. There are many that we've done rooftop, utility scale, energy storage for universities, for others that are out there. We continue to do those kinds of activities. And if we can't do it on the regulated side because of whether regulations are moving too slow or whatever, we'll do it on the unregulated side, because if there's a relationship with the customer, that's what we're looking for in the future. The customer experience side of things, which I'll admit has been somewhat neglected over years past, we certainly are focused on enhancing. Now, at your level, there has been that level of customer experience, but from a general standpoint, when you talk about customers across the board, we have to fully understand and have more knowledge about what our customers are truly asking for.
And what about, when we talk about customers, a lot of customers have different needs. What about customization?
I think we have to get to customization. It's been something we haven't done well in this industry. I think part of it's our internal cultures, and a lot of it has been also, it's been the regulatory environment that we're in. We're fully regulated as we are in New Mexico and our transmission and distribution company in Texas. Right? We have to treat everybody the same. So to Nick's point, we're going to have to figure out how to do it. I think on the unregulated side, but I even think in the regulated side, for example, on the T&D grid, we're going to have to figure out how to be much more customized and be able to work with you. If you want solar, but you would prefer that we own it, why can't we put that in our rate base and have it count towards our renewable goals? It's cheaper for everyone, it's cheaper for society, but we've had regulators that are loath to do that because they're either appointed or elected by broad swaths of the public. Even if you're appointed, you're probably appointed by a governor who was elected. So I think it's moving towards much more customization. For folks like you, to Nick's point, you've always seen some, but probably not as much as you would like. And even for the residential customers, that, other than watching cat videos, there's a lot of power in that smartphone that customers can have in terms of managing their energy. And I don't think we have demand response programs and energy efficiency programs, but they're pretty broad brush, right? Here's our peak, here's what you can do. I think we need to harness the power of the internet and social media to make that even more widespread. You know, as you said, your kids never have actually read a physical newspaper, probably. We have a whole generation of folks that don't understand why they can't control everything in their house from that smartphone, and why they have to do it the way we want them to do it as opposed to the way they want to do it. And I don't think we've come up with a solution to that yet in this industry, but I think we are all spending a lot more time thinking about it. And I think with the technology out there and all the really smart people, we'll get there.
There's no doubt that we have to develop a common infrastructure that people can attach to and companies can attach to that provides the resources that are available that really fill in the gaps of what your own resources may provide. And as we have customers, individual customers, making those kinds of decisions, and it becomes more prevalent, it's going to be important for us to be able to marshal the full suite of those individual customer resources to manage the grid in a way that maintains the reliability of the grid. So for us, our business is changing from generation, transmission, distribution to infrastructure development and the customer experience. And that's where we come in to make sure that, and the industry is moving that direction as well, so that we can provide what's truly needed by our customers.
So with smart grids and connecting to smart devices and lots of information in the future, how can we get smarter regulation? How can we get the regulators to keep pace with the pace of change?
I think certainly the biggest thing is for our customers to be talking to our regulators as well, not just us. I mean, we're seen as biased. You may be surprised by that, but we are seen as biased on occasion from our regulator perspective. So, but customers are not, and customers can make those kinds of decisions and have those kinds of discussions with commissions, and that would be very helpful to all of us to advance the ball, because they obviously listen to you as well. And for us to be saying the same thing in terms of what the needs of the system need to provide, how the rate-making mechanisms can be equitable along the process to ensure that you're contributing things other than just providing your product. You're contributing a positive aspect for the entire social network that's out there. And I think there's a lot of benefits. And you talk about a lot about least cost planning. I think it's more value-based planning that we're moving to, where it means more than just what the least cost is. It's the value to you as a customer to make those choices as we go forward.
Pat?
And I think part of that is you all are very knowledgeable about energy. In general, the general population is not very knowledgeable about energy. It used to be that you flipped the switch and the light was on and you paid your bill. Now those days are gone and customers are more interested, but we also need to educate the population in terms of the network, the value of the network, how things can change, because right now you find there's a very small group, but they're very vocal, that get into our regulatory proceedings. And we need to sort of arm the general population with knowledge so that they can engage in good discussions too. And Nick, you talked about planning. One of the things we've really tried to do on our planning process is get as many people involved as them, because we always think the more people that understand our business, the better off we are. We may not always agree with everybody, but at least we're having a debate about the facts. And one of the things I know the industry is doing, and I think probably every individual company is doing, is thinking about how to best communicate with our customers. I mentioned earlier, grid makes the eyes glaze over, but how we talk about things in a way that people can understand and actually that will get their interest in.
Reliability is always a huge issue for customers. There's a new book coming out on Tuesday from Ted Koppel. It's called Lights Out: Cyber Attack, A Nation Unprepared, and how you can respond to some of these things. Nick?
Yeah, so that's sort of interesting. You see movies come out about blackouts caused by cyber events, and you see books come out about how to, I guess, a recipe for how to bring down the system. You know, this industry has been working on this with the federal government for years. And we do drills. Matter of fact, we're having our third major drill here in November, GridX3. Now, where we test not only the systems that are in place, but we also test the reaction and the work that's done together with the federal government and the different agencies of the government. It's also, we have the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, of a group of CEOs in the industry that meet regularly with the federal government agencies to talk about areas, tools, and areas of concern that they have that we can work on together. So there's many aspects of this, and it goes into physical security and cyber security, where the industry is really trying to address, in many regards, not only making sure that critical infrastructure is physically secure, but also ensuring that we have the tools and capabilities from a cyber standpoint to not only detect intruders that may be attempting to get onto our system, but also the reaction and the tools to support eradication of those kinds of issues. So the industry is working on this directly. This is where President Obama and the administration has been very positive in working with the industry on these kinds of issues. So this industry is prepared. Now, you're always behind from a cyber standpoint. You're always chasing the bad guys. But the issue is, if the bad guys do get in, how far do they get in? Do you stop them before they get to critical infrastructure? And then secondly, the reaction time associated with how we resolve the issues that may occur. So those are clearly where the federal government and the industry is working on together. So we feel pretty good about where we stand, but the threat is out there and the threat is real. There's no question about that. I mean, you get millions of phishing exercises and all those kinds of things that are hitting our system on a continual basis. And certainly we've been very focused on it at AEP because if you Google, let's bring down the American Electric Power System, well, we sort of show up. So, but nevertheless, the industry is on top of this.
Well, unlike other industries that may be worried about customer information, which we are also concerned about, or denial of service on their websites, we do have to worry about that big destructive attack. And so we have been named as one of the 5 lifeline sectors that are most important to protect. And that is why I think for the last several years we've been working so diligently with the government. Ted Koppel presumes that it's all the industry's responsibility. And I really don't think that's possible, because we do have a situation where we need to work with the government on these issues because we've gotten technologies from the labs, from Idaho Lab. We've gotten, that information sharing that we do with the government on a real-time basis is about threats and things of that nature is incredibly helpful. And again, the exercises we do in concert with the government. Pat, I wonder.
I always like to remind people that we are the only industry that has, enforceable mandatory reliability standards, both for physical security and for cyber security, and they carry penalties of $1 million a day if you violate that standards. I also say that we probably have really big egos, so none of us wants our company, although thank you for being American Electric Power, Nick, to be attacked. So the industry has been working on this for a long time, and we're actually out there now advocating some passage of legislation that allows us to share information even better with the government, because to Nick's point, the amount of threats, when I'm sure you look at the millions of phishing attempts you get, the attacks, we need to be able to share information quickly, because the folks out there doing this to us, the nation states, have a lot of smart people and they're putting a lot of money toward it. So it really is a joint defense with industry and the government, and we have, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, the White House. So we're working with all branches of the government to make sure that we have the depth in defense. We do the exercises to make sure we know what's going on. And the other thing the industry really focuses on is the resiliency, because the threats are out there, and we can't protect against every threat that is out there. But we have, transformer sharing programs. We have mutual assistance. So we know if something does happen to someone, we're all going to step up very quickly to help them get back on. And that's one of the strengths of this industry, is our working together.
And you think about the GridX 3 exercises and the GridX 2 and 1, it made us think about things that we hadn't thought about before. I mean, when you think about an outage of the electric system, you think of it fairly localized unless there's a massive blackout, for example. But typically, those kinds of outages will last just a few hours, if that. If it's a major one, like storm-related, when the derecho came through, it was 2 or 3 weeks. Well, you can imagine if a whole part of the country were out for a month, 2 months, 6 months, that drives a very different thing. And that's why I call our grid a social safety network, because it is the drawing line between civilization and anarchy. We've seen that over and over, and the longer that kind of thing would persist, it really drives you deeper in understanding in terms of what happens to law enforcement, what happens to all the support structures, medical, all those types of things along the way. So that's why so many agencies are being brought into these exercises, so that we can be resilient as a nation in terms of our response.
Well, the President's advisory group on this topic, the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, put us up as a model, which is very, very nice. But as you indicate, the threats or the problems are so large that it's necessary to be a model, and we definitely want to stay in front of it. Pat mentioned mutual assistance, which is something that I'm very proud of. If we can go back to Hurricane Sandy, under your leadership, after Hurricane Sandy, we revisited our whole way we do business. We reorganized our whole operations, and we had a new federal partnership. But that's something where the President joined in with us as well, and we brought 67,000 people from around the country. Pat sent people to Ohio and Pennsylvania, and everybody else did as well. So
there was just a tremendous activity. Hurricane Superstorm Sandy was a great learning experience for the industry. Number one, we found out there were several regional response networks in the Northeast, and we consolidated those regional response networks so that they could communicate much better. There's also, as Pat mentioned, the spare parts program and all those programs that we put in place to make sure that we were resilient in our response, knowing exactly where spare parts are, knowing the logistics associated with getting them to the right place at the right time, and making sure that we marshal. Really, when you think about a large event that could occur, like Superstorm Sandy, 67,000 resources brought from around the country, that's about the limit of what you're going to get. So those resources need to be brought to bear very quickly, and also be very efficient in their process, because we are fairly limited. If it's a large, major event, it has to be well coordinated to ensure we have work teams working at the right location at a given time. So it's just a massive coordination effort, but one that the industry certainly continues to learn from decades of experience, but it's been taken to a new level and actually was brought in to play with the physical security and cybersecurity aspects, because the results would be the same in terms of resiliency to get supply back.
And I think, Tom, this is just another instance of where our industry works very well with the government. We talked about how with the Clean Power Plan, by engaging constructively, we were able to make changes. The professor earlier mentioned the ozone standard. The electric utility industry played a huge role in making sure that it didn't go below 70 parts per billion. So, and we engaged so constructively, and Tom said the president weighed in. We had a CEO call after Hurricane Sandy, and I think for a while we all thought it was an impersonator, but it was actually the president on the phone on the CEO call because he thought what we're doing was so important. So no matter which party is in power, this industry has engaged incredibly well because we do have, I believe, a special responsibility to make sure that we do have the reliable, affordable, costly, increasingly green power for our customers, and it's something we take very seriously. And I always say to the folks in my company, I feel very special to be in this industry because everybody has that feeling that we do provide a public service.
Well, and I don't know of any other industry that does this kind of mutual assistance, where companies come to the aid of each other. And when you had another superstorm coming up through the Gulf Coast, or through the West Coast, Superstorm Patricia. I emailed Pat on Friday and said, I hope it doesn't cause much damage, and it turned out to be strong like you, but definitely merciful as well. It didn't.
Actually, I think my assistant said something about me channeling through the storm. So, yeah.
That Pat can be merciful.
Right, exactly. Anyway, we do want to open to questions from the floor, so please raise your hands if anybody has any questions, and we have microphones around the room, and we want to get into some of your questions, so please, we have some back there, okay. And if you can just repeat your name before your question.
Good morning, Lisa Varga from Phoenix Energy Technologies. Pat, you touched on data and how important the role of data will play for the future. Could you elaborate on what the utility's point of view will be in unleashing that data to the clients and giving them the option to release it to their service providers as well?
I think that question is going to depend on the utility. So I don't feel I can speak for the industry on that. I think the question is going to be, who owns the data? Is it the utility or the customer? And if we give it to the customer and they release it, what happens to that data? I would think if it's the customer data's P&M point of view on that would probably be, we would be happy to give it to you and let you release it now. I think part of the issue for us, if we do that, we would be in trouble with our regulators in terms of allowing someone to give that data to someone else. Our laws in New Mexico are very strict about what we can do with customer data. But again, I think that's a place where we need to have a dialogue and possibly work together to change some of the regulations. In many cases, it's not just public utility regulation, it is also your state regulators with that.
Yep.
Yeah. I think some of those data issues remind me of the cybersecurity legislation that's being considered right now. You think it would be a slam dunk for Congress to pass cyber legislation in light of the fact that we need this information exchange to effectively do the job.
And it's a matter of what data too. I mean,
Right.
because we're going to be consolidating data, looking at ways to best manage the system, and so and then you get into privacy issues. I mean, we had a pilot in Ohio, and we sent customers letters telling them what their usage was compared to their neighbor. And boy, we got so many complaints about that because how dare you let my neighbor know what I'm using? It doesn't matter what I use. And so anyway, you get into those kinds of things, and so you have to sort of manage through the process to fully understand what data, how the data can be provided, and make sure that there are systems in place so that we can do what we need to do relative to the system. And certainly allow the customer to do what needs to be done as well.
I think as Pat indicated, we all want to work together because we understand how important that data can be to customers as well as our companies.
Right.
I mean, for example, Tom mentioned the cyber legislation. One of the issues in that is liability. So if we share data and accidentally violate, someone's privacy, we could get sued. Well, if we're trying to prevent a cyber threat, nobody's going to do something on purpose. And you're a big company, so you have big pockets. So a lot of that is, it's your data, we give it to you, you give it to somebody else, and it ends up somebody else, and we get sued. You wouldn't think that would happen, but that kind of stuff does happen. Right. So again, it's that cooperative nature and working together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
John Lark. Can you hear me? John Larkey with Recurrent Energy. It's great to hear you talking a lot about utility scale solar. That's the business we're in. My question, though, to both of you who represent utilities, that are across states. And when you talk about CPP at the state level, presents challenges for utilities like yourselves that are beyond an individual state. How do you think about that in terms of going forward, compliance and the challenges that are presented with that dynamic?
Yeah, so we've encouraged each of our states to look at it on basically a standalone basis to determine what they can do relative to their own resources, and what the assumption is our resource plans will comport with that. But for multi-states, then you'll find out how short or long of resources you are. So our view is that it should be a mass-based approach that's used over several states, so that it would allow trading to occur if necessary. And I think we're used to doing that. We've done that for allowances in other areas. So it is a part of the process, but it's really going to come down to the money involved for each state and how that transfer actually occurs. But we should be able to devise a method for the states to adequately be able to address any shortfalls or even during a certain period. So it really just sort of begs for a trading type of solution.
And I agree with what Nick said. I layer on the state politics in here. We're in Texas and New Mexico. I quite frankly am not sure what Texas is going to end up doing on this. This may be the issue that tips Texas off into seceding from the union. Nick's here too, does business here. I think every state's going to want to make, because remember, this is a state call, right, on what to do, whether you go rate-based or mass-based and how you do it. It's not a utility call. And obviously, I think most states are looking at their utilities for their input. I think each state is going to try to figure out where they're going to be. And if you're in New Mexico, for example, we've got a lot of renewable energy. We might be in a great place, right, to want to have a trading system, but I'm not so sure maybe Arizona wants to do that. And if we declare we're going to go mass-based and have a trading system and nobody around us is, it doesn't work that well. So I think that the states are in the process of digesting the rule. I don't think that a lot of them have digested it enough to know. So I think they'll figure that out, and then they're going to have to figure out, for example, in the West, I think the Western Governors Association will tackle this issue. I just think it's going to take some time for everybody to become very familiar with the rule. And you do see, for example, in terms of different states suing, a lot of that has to do with politics, because on one hand, they're suing, but they're working on their plans. So.
Well, since we're almost out of time, I'll ask the last question. Utility CEOs are supposed to be optimists, I guess, by definition. And we've talked about a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, perhaps a lot of opportunities. Let me ask you the question of what keeps you up at night. Nick, why don't you start?
Well, other than safety, obviously safety is
And
always
you're an optimist
first in our
because you
industry.
think LSU is going to win the
Sure,
national
LSU is going to win
championships
that.
with
Oh, I shouldn't say that. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, so Buckeyes are great too. But anyway, when I look at it from my perspective, it really is how we make that transition, because the vision that we all have for the industry going forward, we have a lot of baggage to carry along the way, and we got to chip away at that anvil so that we can make this transition in a positive fashion. Because I do not plan on being the caretaker of a museum. We have to be able to advance. We have to be able to address the issues and the technologies that exist today that didn't exist just a few years ago. And that's really what keeps me up is how we position. AEP has been around 108 years. How we position it for the next 108 years. And that's something I think that could be very fleeting unless we can really start to focus on ultimately the customer.
Terrific. Pat?
And I'd say, we have great technologies that are advancing. We have customers that are advancing. It's our ability to work with our regulators to advance our regulatory models so that we can all take advantage of all this great customer choice and these great technologies that are out there.
Terrific. Well, it's been a great audience, and I would say, Thomas Edison said if we all did the things we're capable of doing, we would truly astound ourselves. I think that between the people in the audience and the utility industry working together in partnerships, that's where we're going to be. I want to thank both of you. I want to. This is a one of the most popular magazines in the country right now, Electric Perspectives. It's on everybody's coffee table, and we have it out front at the registration desk with Pat's picture on it. We have a former issue with your picture on it next. So,
Can't get that, though. That's out of print.
right, exactly.
They're
But
all in
let's
your
have
basement,
a
right?
great hand and thanks for our leadership.
Thank you.